Meeting is called to order. This is Town Council Special Work Session for September 27th, 2022. We'll start the Pledge of Allegiance, moment of silence.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Please keep our colleague and friend Bob Carnahan in your prayers as he continues to work towards good health. We'll start with public comment on agenda items. I'm sorry, roll call.
Mr. Carnahan.
I want to get going.
Tom Corbin.
Present.
Julie Rivera. Here. Ralph Miller.
Present.
Colleen Sheehan. Here. Richard Sharp.
Here.
Randy Niemeyer.
Present.
I am present. Chris Galatis.
Present.
And David Austin is absent.
Now we'll go to public comment on agenda items. It's my first meeting, so please pardon the screw up. Second call. Third call. Public comments closed. We have our one agenda item. This is a presentation of the 2023 budget. With Corby Thompson of O.W. Cronin Associates, I'd like to thank our team, our staff, leadership of our town manager Chris, our clerk treasurer Jen, Corby, Sue, Cliff, Todd, Bill, our council affairs committee, Ralph, Rick, and myself, everybody that inputted on this process. It's a growing community. It becomes a little more complex than what it used to be, a lot more moving parts. What you'll see tonight, though, is a really good picture of not just the spending plan, which is the budget, but also the revenues that support it, how those revenues are raised, and how it creates the sustainability that we're after here from a standpoint of keeping the budget balanced, keeping cash balances growing, and not allowing our spending to outpace our revenue. So with that, I'll turn this over to Corby, Jen, and Chris.
All right, Corby, we got you on first.
Sure.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
So you guys all should on your iPads, I believe, have a presentation of 15, 16 slides or so that we're going to go over. As Randy just mentioned, this is quite an update from the budget from last year, but as can be expected with all the growth that you guys have had in the community, all the projects you have going on, and all of that. So hopefully we'll touch on a lot of that. But with that being said, I'll kind of just go ahead and get started here. The first slide I have is just a summary of the cash balances over the last 4.5 years or so, going back to 2018. So the reason I wanted to include this before we start talking about the budget is just it's a good idea to know where you're coming from, where you're going, and how have you kind of been performing. This is just one metric, it's cash, but it is a very important metric to look at. So it is a pretty good indication of how we're doing, at least from a financial perspective. What you'll see is each year we've had some pretty significant cash increases, including over a $2 million cash increase in 2021. So I want to mention that before we get started so that you just, again, know that we are currently have much more revenue than we do appropriations, or at least amounts that we actually spend, and that's large in part due to the growth of the town with your building, zoning, permits, and those kinds of things. So that is the primary driver when you see these increases, but that's not to say you aren't doing well operationally as well. So just wanted to make that comment before we start touching on some of the revenues and updates in comparison to the 22 budget. So the next slide, pretty similar slide that we had last year. We do what we can to make sure that the town is at its max levy. You guys are getting what state statutes allow you to have. And again, those are kind of determined outside of our abilities, at the state level and the county level. For the most part, they're the ones that determine how much we can actually levy and how much local income taxes and those things. But we do have the ability to allocate certain revenues, and there are certain things we can do and take advantage of to make sure that we're getting the revenues that we need for our operations. So the key thing on this schedule I really want to point out would be the the 3 bullet points under the property tax levies. So in 2022, we filed for a 3-year growth appeal, and again, just so you guys remember, what that is if your AV goes up so much, more than it exceeds the state average by 2%, you're entitled to a levy adjustment to essentially make sure that you guys are receiving the levy and the revenues that you need for your growing community. So that's what the 3-year growth appeal is. We'll be filing for that this year again as well. The next 2 bullet points are new. We'll be filing for an extension of services appeal this year. And the main function of that will be to fund the park budget. And we'll touch on that in a little more detail later, a couple times actually. So that is a new one. We're applying for a $1 million levy for that park budget. And basically whatever the DLGF authorizes us, that's what our budget will end up being. So when we get the 1782 notice down the road, I'm jumping way ahead here, but just so you guys know, it's a 1-for-1 essentially. What we can get, what we're authorized to get by DLGF, that's what we'll actually budget. But for now, it's about a $1 million levy, about a $1 million budget. So the last item would be the public safety facilities bond. So this would be an additional debt levy this year for 2023. You already have certain debt levies with certain bonds that are outstanding. This would essentially just be in addition to those. So there will be an additional levy for the debt service on those bonds. I'm going to go over again each of those in a little more detail, so if you have any questions, we'll answer those on the next several slides. So here's your 3-year growth appeal calculation. So in addition to the 5% that you guys and every community in the state is automatically allowed to have, the ABGQ, that was 5% this year. You guys had about, I can't remember the number, I think it's another about 5% on top of that. So overall, you get an additional levy increase of $164,000 over the standard levy increase that you guys are allowed. Again, pretty similar to what we had last year, so this shouldn't really be anything new. Are there any questions on the 3-year growth appeal?
Point of clarification, as we look at year 2022 town assessed value, that's actually the assessed value from 21, isn't it?
That is the assessed value from 22.
Is it?
We have the 23 AV now.
Oh, okay.
When you calculate you have to use the preceding year AVs when you do this calculation. So it's a good point.
Do we know about what that 23 is going to come in?
Yes, it was 16% was the total AV increase.
Okay.
It was like 16.9%.
Yeah, 16.9%. So again, next year when we get to the 2024 budget, we'll be able to use the 23 AV in our calculation. You guys will more than likely qualify again for a 3-year growth appeal. And again, those are not designed to just increase your levy, increase your tax rate. That's to hold your tax rate somewhat level. There's always a little bit of a timing difference because, as you just mentioned, Randy, we can't use the 23 AV, even though that's what our tax rates next year are based on.
23 AV is actually from 22.
Correct. Yeah, it just got released.
22 AV is from 21.
Yeah.
It's always lagging that year behind.
That's right. So.
Thanks for that clarification.
Yep. Any other questions there? Okay, so continuing on. So again, that's a standard appeal that really anybody can file for. So again, we're taking advantage of that. We're going to go to the next slide. We've got additional needs for those monies. So we need that 3-year growth appeal levy. However, in our situation, it's not going to be enough this year. And the main reason would be, as I already mentioned, the park. So again, this is a pretty similar slide we've had the last couple of years, but on the right, I've added, a new couple pretty park pictures for us there. So. On the next page, I've got a little bit of information about the additional levy adjustments, which would be the extension of services appeal, as well as the public safety debt levy. So we're filing again for $1 million extension of services appeal. It's very similar to the 3-year growth appeal. You have to get it approved by DLGF, and as long as we make, well enough justification and we have all the forms of resolution signed and in order, hopefully they'll grant us that levy. So one thing I want to mention would be that over the last several years, your tax rates dropped. So from 2017, you had about an 81-cent tax rate. The tax rate for 2022 was 56 cents, 57 cents. So we've mentioned that we're going to have quite a few levy increases these next several years. We're not going above and beyond what the historical tax rate of this town has ever been. We're just getting it back to where it needs to be, as we've fallen a little bit short on our operating revenues the last several years to be able to do all of the things we want to do, like have a park. We really can't implement this park budget and the park district as they would like to have it without this extension of services filing. So that is the main function of that. In addition, we have an $11.9 million bond proposed right now for the new public safety facility, and it's really as simple as just whatever the debt service that's required on that bond payment, that's what we're ultimately going to levy. Right now, we're looking at a 15-year bond. It could be a 20-year bond. There's still some things that we need to figure out on the terms, but again, those will be finalized down the road. But to give you guys a nice picture, on the next page, you can kind of just see where your AVs have been and where your tax rates have been.
Real quick,
Yes.
prior slide,
Sure.
assuming 15-year bond of 5.5, with everything that's happened in the last 5 days, is that still a realistic percentage?
So, yes, and it's pretty interesting. The yield curve is almost flat right now, which basically means the short-term borrowing is almost the same exact as a 15-year borrowing, which I couldn't explain why, but that's kind of what we're seeing right now. So yeah, I believe that's still an accurate number. Previously, we had quoted, like 2.5%, 3%, basically before this year. That's what we would have been looking at now, 5.5%, 5%.
Yeah.
Kind of where the current environment's taken us. So.
And like in the past, John, if you remember 10 years ago, we refunded a lot of our bonds that were issued like in 2007 and things like that because the interest rate dropped so much. So there's always those opportunities if you're in a good cash position and have healthy bond rating, that a few years from now you can always repackage some things.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. We would definitely be looking at hoping to have some kind of redemption provision and refund those maybe at a later date. But yes, that's the number we're looking at right now. The next slide, though, I think kind of gives a really good picture, though, of what I was talking about. We've had these large AV increases basically really since 2017, at least on a percentage basis. So what that's really done to the tax rate over time is it's dropped it from 81 cents to about 57 cents this year. So we talked about, implementing these new levies specifically for the park and for the new public safety facilities that are most definitely needed. So we're going to bring the tax rate back up to 79.4 cents. So as you can see that we are raising the tax rate. However, I want to note on the next slide the impacts to residents here. So even with everything that we're proposing here, the additional park levy, the debt levy for the bonds, and the 3-year growth appeal, we're still only looking at, depending on which township you're in, a maximum of $61 or $51 annually for those residents that are not at the circuit breaker right now. So very minimal impacts to residents. It looks like a large, go ahead.
Where is that circuit breaker at right now?
Well, it's 1% for residential property.
Right, but I'm saying, like, where is that net AV at where you start to get the credits applied?
Right now, $125,000 home is where, essentially, if you're taking your full homestead deductions, mortgage deductions, and those things.
So your average
everybody
residential
over
taxpayer, you're looking at $61 in.
Well, it's only $61 if your home, if your gross AV,
Max.
your gross AV, your home. I could give you the net AV number, I've got it on the spreadsheet, but I've got the gross AV figure here, so. Everybody over right now, basically $125,000 home is already at circuit breaker, so there'll be absolutely zero impact to those individuals. And anybody below that, minor impacts, but there will be some. So, I did just want to point that out. We're getting a lot done with not a lot of impact to the residents.
I think that's always the important number for everybody is, what's the bottom line, right?
Yeah.
What is it
Yeah.
that's gonna be
Yeah.
out of pocket for the average residential taxpayer?
And I don't want to say this is exactly how it will end up, because there's a lot of assumptions that go into this. This is assuming all of the other taxing units have the same exact tax rate as they had for '22. So there are some assumptions like that. You know, I don't know what the schools are doing, I'm not sure what the county's doing, but if their tax rate goes up, there might be some other impacts, or vice versa, if it's going down, there might be less of an impact, so.
The county's tax rate will actually be shrinking a little bit, which is
Good
good.
to hear.
Well, their financial advisor there, the budget director, has done a fabulous job this year with trimming off old encumbrances that have been carried over for 15-plus years, really slimming down that thing to more of a, he basically went to zero base on most of it and looked at historical needs instead of historical budgets, and they've trimmed a good bit off, so kudos to them. It'll help all the taxing units.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have a really low circuit breaker loss right now as is, and so any increase to the tax rate will increase your circuit breaker losses a little bit, but it's essentially an insignificant amount. You guys are only like 2% circuit breaker losses right now, where, I mean, even north side of Indianapolis communities, they might have 35% circuit breaker losses, so, you guys are doing well there. So I just want to mention that. That's really all I wanted to cover on the revenue. So again, in my opinion, there's really three really big updates, or really two big updates. 3-year growth appeal, yes, but you guys should continue and have been qualifying for those. The extension of services, filing, and the debt service level. That's what I want to focus on there.
So essentially, for the public watching, people out there, that for the cost of about $5 a month, you could be possibly getting $1 million park budget and a new public safety facility out of that. So
Yes.
that's pretty good value for $5 a month. That's hard to beat.
Yeah.
So, yeah, let's hope that all of it comes in like we want it to.
That's right, that's right. So we can move on to the appropriations if we don't have any other questions on the revenue there. So I'm just going to talk about town administration. When I say that, I kind of mean the council, town manager, some of the planning department as well. But one of the main things that we focused on again this year is getting pay increases for those top leadership positions. I know Randy always talks about shrinking the gap between the private and public sector, so it's something kind of along the lines of that. You know, we want to make sure that we can retain and attract top talent that you have, or that, you know, you're looking to get. You know, if we're looking to hire a park director, we want to make sure that we get somebody that knows more than what they're doing, you know, obviously. So that was a big focus this year, and that's kind of every department. We kind of see that in this budget. We increase kind of the top salaries and wages of all of those kind of management positions. Most other individuals outside of those positions, as the budget sits right now, have about a 3% increase in their salaries and wages. So that's how the budget sits as we currently look at it. Clerk Treasurer Department, let's briefly touch on that. There's really no big updates. The only increase we have there would just be if Jen gets a new qualification. So pretty standard blocks as you had it set up last year. If she gets a new qualification, she'll get a pay increase. Otherwise,
Didn't you just get a new qualification? You got some letters.
She got
I
some
did, but my most recent,
more awesomeness out of legal.
my most recent
Yeah, she got the MA.
is not within our salary. My CPFIM certification, so the Certified Public Funds Investment Management certification I received, is not actually listed out in our salary ordinance,
No.
because nobody has ever gone for it before.
What's the next one in the salary ordinance?
The next one So earlier this year, I received my certified municipal clerk through the IIMC. The one after that would be a master municipal clerk, but that one is far more intensive, so it'll probably take me about another year to get all of the training and all of the classes I need in order to earn that certification.
Well, keep working towards it, you're doing great.
I'm trying. Thank you.
That's all I have really there for your department there, Jen. PZB, we do have some big updates there. In the budget, we have some pay increases for those inspectors, and then we also have the hiring of 2 additional building inspectors. Now, I mentioned that they will only be hired as needed. So, if building slows with kind of the economy that we see right now, then we might not need them, but they have been budgeted if we need them. It's always easy to budget for that department, they bring in a lot of revenue. So that's kind of a dynamic department there. As funds are needed and they're coming in, we can hire more people. If not, we can cut back there if we need to. So just wanted to mention that. Other updates will really be, there's one large update outside of kind of inflationary updates, I would say, and that would be the reallocation of certain employee benefits, primarily the group health insurance. So Sue had done some analysis, kind of figured out, we've got all these salaries and wages coming out of these funds and these departments, but the group health insurance payments were not really aligning with what we were seeing. So as an attempt to more align the benefits that go with the employees, or at least where their wages are being paid out of, we reallocated about $215,000 from the utilities to the general fund. So that is a large increase right there for personal services in the general fund. Some other increases, again, as I mentioned, would just be inflationary increases. Insurance and premiums are going way up. I know cybersecurity is a big one. Everybody's been looking into that, and that's gone up from every community that I've been working with pretty significantly. So those would be some of the things that we were looking at there. Fuel's an obvious one. Professional services, we did increase it. We have $100,000 additionally in there again. I think, Jen, you said this year we're running a little low, so we just want to make sure that we have enough for those, one-time special projects in there. As you guys are growing, make sure that we have the appropriations available to fulfill those projects. Increase the technology budget. I know we've added several lines of PZB as well as the council's budget just for various technological updates. All the way from what do you call it? What were we calling that?
Software digitization, going from paper to putting things on the computer.
Yeah, that to potentially having some kind of GIS service here shortly. So kind of prepping for all of that coming down the pipeline. On the next slide, got just some basic updates regarding the public safety department, so police and fire here. Again, same kind of concept as the administration of the town. I've been kind of just saying that we're kind of just pulling the top up. So, those top positions are getting larger pay increases and pay gaps so that there are, incentives and those things in place to reach those next levels, but also that, the responsibilities of those leadership roles are being paid fairly. So that was the major update there. Everybody really had a 3% cost of living adjustment outside of that. And then other big increases would just be for the fire budget. I'm sure you guys are aware we're running low on overtime this year, and that's just kind of a function of where the town's at with the needs. So we have increased their overtime budget pretty significantly there. And then everything else is really just for increased maintenance costs, fuel costs. So really, again, inflation adjustments for kind of the environment that we find ourselves in right now. Oh, one additional police officer as well for 2023. So that is a big update. We'll have 24 full-time officers beginning in 2023.
We have 24 now.
25 full-time officers. Sorry about that. But yes, so those are the big updates I have there. You guys have any questions regarding the general fund?
So if I could jump back to those allocations of benefits.
Sure.
So for people that might not know, when we were under a frozen levy, my first year on the council, we borrowed right around $1 million from our sewer utility just to kind of pay bills to stretch ourselves, and we used to do that as a matter of routine, but we utilized our user fee funds like sewer, water, and stormwater to pay people in public works to take care of certain parts of the benefits package. It was kind of just trying to keep everything afloat. And this has been a 12-year journey to get here to where we could actually match up the benefits cost with the right fund that their salary's coming out of. So it's been kind of a monumental shift that's taken a long time. But now that we're here, we have the budget principles in place to become a little more predictable in what we can do, because you can start to tie everything together in kind of one lump. Is, okay, if you add an employee, it costs this much amongst all those funds, instead of trying to guess where we're going to take the money from to pay for different parts of their package. So I think that's a huge step in the right direction that will yield benefits for years to come as we continue to grow the staff and the community continues to grow. We have a tool there that helps us measure that.
Yep. Perfect. Thank you, Randy. Any other questions or comments on the general fund appropriations? Still the park budget to go over. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So the park budget, as I mentioned, I mentioned the levy that we're applying for. That will be, this budget will change based on whatever the DLGF essentially authorizes us to have. So if we get $1 million levy, we'll have about $1,064,000 budget, and the reason is there's some miscellaneous revenues that go along with the levy and some other minor details there. But as the park budget sits right now, we've got a $436,000 personal services budget, and really what that gets you is a park superintendent, a recreation coordinator, 2 full-time staff to maintain the park, or actually 3 full-time staff to maintain the park, including mechanic or foreman, and then part-time crew as needed. So that would be kind of the personnel that would go along with the park, or at least that's been proposed at this time. We've got about $71,000 for supplies, and that would be primarily just miscellaneous tools, fuel, wearables on equipment, those kinds of things. For services and charges, we've got $330,000 in there, and a large chunk of that, I think about around $100,000, was for professional services to basically have a park master plan in place. So just getting, whatever's needed there from the engineers, legal, finance, whatever we need, get that park budget really rolling, and then obviously we can use that money for, contracted maintenance too if we need it. So that's in large part the services and charges for the budget. And then we have $220,000 in capital outlays. So first several years, that'll primarily be purchasing equipment to maintain the parks. Later years, that'll probably be more to improve the facilities at the parks. So those are at least the items that we've identified as a starting point for the park. That will also be in our resolution that we file with the DLGF. Everything that we need to justify why we need those things. And I know Chris you kind of really led the charge on getting this budget together. So we're going to work on getting the narrative to go along with these numbers, make sure that we have a good argument for the DLGF. Are there questions on the park budget? Okay. Next slide, I've kind of just got an overview of everything I just talked about. So if you look at our budget at face value, it looks like we have a massive increase of $2 million, and you'd say, how are we going to fund that? Well, one thing I already mentioned is we have the $1 million extension of services levy appeal that we have. So right there's $1 million, but $1,065,000 or so after the miscellaneous revenues associated with that. So we really have a budget increase of $935,000 or 16%. Well, as we actually just discussed earlier, we saw you had an AV increase of 16.9%. So just kind of one way to look at it there, but of that $935,000, a large part of it is for increased salaries and wages, including the inspectors that are yet to be hired, the additional police officers. So we have a lot of these things, and we do have mechanisms to pay for them, as we have the 3-year growth appeal, the automatic levy increases, and we have continued cash flows, as you can see from this previous years from the first slide. So all of those should easily be able to cover the expenses that are proposed in this increased general fund budget. So I just wanted to make some notes of that, as it looks like a very large increase, and it is, but we have thought about how we're going to pay for all that, and we can sustain that. So I just wanted to mention that there. I know there were also some other discussions on maybe what a 5% increase, base salary increase would be versus a 3% salary increase, and it's actually fairly minimal, as a lot of those leadership positions already have more than the 5% increase already. So when you take that into consideration, it's only about $100,000 between salaries and wages and employee benefits additionally that we would need to see to go from a 3%, kind of base increase versus 5%. I might have said that wrong, but I think you get where I'm going. So we did not include that in the budget that we advertised, and I mentioned that so that if we do want to go that route, or that is something we can do or want to do, we'll either have to take away from another appropriation line, or we'll have to do an additional appropriation. Either way works, but just did want to mention that, as I know there were some council members asking about what that difference might be there. Are there any questions?
So far, so good.
Okay. All right, I'm going to touch some of the other slides. Again, the general fund is by far your biggest fund, and where a substantial amount of your services for your town come out of. But we do have other funds. We have MVH and LRS. These are some of your public works funds. Again, same concept as with the general fund. Leadership position pay increases to attract and retain that best talent. Most others have about a 3% cost of living adjustment there. And then we have the availability to hire a new crew member for 2023. And that would be payable out of MVH and water, I think, but I can double check on that. So we do allow for an additional employee crew member for Tim. Overall budget increase of about $96,000, and again, that's primarily just because of fuel costs, increased maintenance costs, and then again, the new employee. LRS, we have an increase of $30,000. That's just a direct relation to match essentially the increased revenues over the previous year. So we've got about $250,000 estimated LRS distribution next year, and so we've essentially just...
What's the acronym again?
That's local road and street. MVH is motor vehicle highway.
Yeah, MVH motor vehicle highway.
Yeah, LRS is local road and street there.
I like the pothole picture you guys chose.
Yeah.
Appropriate, thank you.
Good for you. Yeah.
That's not here.
Yeah, I took that up.
It's universal in the state of Indiana. We have terrible roads.
It's universal in the Midwest.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go to Michigan in the spring. Oh, my God.
I should mention one other thing for MVH too. In order to pay for that 16% increase, we did allocate a little bit more levy than we had in previous years to MVH, like 0.5% of your total levy. So, a small detail, but nonetheless, there it is for you. Any questions on those two public works funds?
No, sir.
Ccd Fund, this is your cumulative capital development fund. And the sustainability plan, we essentially have decided we'll use that as our capital equipment replacement fund. So for 2023, we have all of the current police vehicle and equipment leases outstanding, but then we also allow for 4 additional police cars to be leased for 2023. For fire, we have the current fire truck, ambulance, and equipment lease, as well as some allowances for each of the police department and the fire department. But the one, I'll say significant item or different item would be, we have a public works truck, a brand new public works truck, budgeted out of CCD for 2023. Because your AV, so this is where your AV, you actually get it right away, would be for the CCD fund. So because you have a 5-cent rate, that 16.9% increase in AV, you get a 16.9% increase in your CCD fund levy. So for this year's budget, there is $50,000 that we had in the notice that we have no identification of a use for. So it's in there.
We'll find it.
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
So there's a couple of chiefs over there that can find use for that release.
So I did want to mention that, that increase in AV does help, especially for the CCD fund, at least right away. So that's one of 2 funds where we kind of have unspoken for funds or appropriations that I know we will find a use for. So CCI, very small budget. We just kind of use whatever we have for IT purchases.
That's for cumulative capital improvements.
Yes, yeah. And I would imagine very shortly we're going to get rid of that fund and just absorb it into the general fund, but it's still there for now. Next, we have your local income tax funds. So you have your economic development fund, and that's obviously where your local income taxes for local economic development go. And those are to pay for the 2015 road bond that's outstanding. I believe those mature in 2025, so a couple more years left on those, but once those bonds are paid off, we've essentially freed up some cash flow in those local income tax funds, but they are still outstanding for next year and a couple years beyond.
But how much of that, what's the debt service number on that?
I think it's about $150,000 a year, I believe. So
Right.
it's $150,000, not just one year, every year that you essentially will be able to appropriate elsewhere.
Kind of the rule of thumb that we've always gone by is debt times 7. It's kind of what you can afford
Yeah, that's fair.
as far as total value of projects.
Yes. We've got $80,000 for professional services for basically miscellaneous economic development projects. Those will be identified. We will have those projects, and I'm sure Chris already has thoughts in mind for those uses there. So, but however, there is an additional $100,000 in this fund, and the main reason would be there were some in the sustainability plan. We had identified a couple projects that have either been delayed or we found other funding for. So there's been some cash accumulation there. I didn't want to use it all, so I just chose $100,000 as an unspoken for appropriation that we essentially have in there. We can always go above and beyond that if we find a project, but if it's above that $100,000, we'll have to do an additional appropriation.
So do we know what our seeded money is going to be?
Not yet.
It depends on what people make, right?
Right. Usually sometime in November, you'll get the certified amounts. Obviously, we don't have that information when we're doing the budget.
You can kind of just take a look at the trend zone and assume that you're probably going to see the income numbers jump somewhere between 5 and 10% based on most of the private sector numbers.
I would think so as well, although we saw it drop in 21 and
But that was based on some of that COVID hangover stuff.
Was it seeded years ago that everybody tried getting for the train, double track?
Yeah.
And we balked and said we need it for the lake?
We were one of the few that held out.
Yeah. I can't remember if it was seeded or low. It was seeded. County Economic
Look, they're
Development.
building it anyways without us, so.
Yeah, they worked it out.
They didn't need our money.
That's good.
Your other public safety fund would be your lit public safety, or your other local income tax fund would be your lit public safety fund. And essentially all of the revenues that we have in there go to your PSAP contract. So, that's the appropriation out of that fund. Any questions for the local income tax fund? Comments?
So that would be $425,000?
That's what we budgeted for. I'm not sure we'll quite be that high, but that's, yes.
What were the metrics on that as far as, did you estimate, an income percentage increase
For the,
for the lit funds?
for the revenues?
Yeah.
Yeah, essentially, I just look at historically, kind of, as you mentioned, the trend. You know, I'd have to look at exactly what we have in there, but it's probably 5 or 7% over the previous year's numbers.
Sounds reasonable.
Yeah, just a simple calculation. Like I said, November, we'll get those numbers for sure, and we can share all that out, but.
Yeah, because you've seen some public sector pay go up as much as 20% in certain segments, and kind of the average in that 7 to 10% range.
So the Lowell money here, though, comes from the county to us, right?
Yeah, it's
That's what makes up that fund.
Right, so the county utilizes
I would say 50/50
the income tax money as a mechanism for property tax relief, which was part of
Yeah.
the statute when it was adopted. So the county doesn't have as heavy of a property tax burden as they would if they didn't have the income tax.
Right.
They're able to offset those distressed communities that have tax rates in the 7 and 8 range like Gary,
Right.
and then that's offset by that income tax collection.
So just because our town's growing, people are making more money, doesn't necessarily mean we get all of it. It's distributed amongst the entire county.
We'll get our share,
Right.
So
just
here's,
our portion.
yeah, here's something that none of us have, I don't even know if I've talked with Chris about this. Well, with increasing the town's levy, the local income taxes are directly tied to your working max levy. So with the levy appeals this year, not only should you get increased levy, you should get increased share of the, you know, the pie, if you will, at the county level of the local income taxes. So
Great.
it's, you know, we could estimate what that increase is. It's
Minuscule.
Yeah, well, it's,
Probably.
yeah, it's just, they're large numbers, and then you're making huge assumptions, and, you know, what is everybody else's levies doing, and that kind of thing, but,
So we just wait and see what we get.
And local income tax formulations are kind of complex when you look at how they're applied to the county budget and then how they trickle down to the locals.
Yeah.
But again, if the county didn't have the income tax, the county's property tax portion of your bill would take up so much space, it would be tough for other taxing units to have any space to tax.
True.
yeah. All right, so I've got a couple more funds I think I just want to touch on here. Casino Gaming Fund, the only thing we have, you know, typically we have more than $50,000 budgeted out of there. We only have $50,000, that was what was identified in the sustainability plan, and that was basically just to start building funds for a future project. I can't even remember what project that was, but we are building those funds for a purpose in the future. So that's why we only have $50,000 there. Debt service funds, you know, we levy those as essentially needed for debt service payments. The one huge update there again would be the new public safety facilities bond. So again, that will be probably around a $1 million levy itself. We're still working through those numbers, and based on what we have in the budget, we can't go over $1.5 million levy there. I would never anticipate that that's what we get, but just so you guys know, that is what was advertised, but I anticipate about a $1 million levy there. Redevelopment General Fund, I don't really have any big updates there. Pretty similar. The reason the MVH allocation went up is because it left the RDC's tax levy number the same, which essentially allowed MVH to take on more increase. So,
we're kind of preparing that TIF district for its sunset.
Yes.
In a sense, because it's got, what, about 6 more years?
Yeah, 6-7 more years, yeah. So.
And we're already working on establishing a new TIF district, so then we can reset the old one, have the pause, and then,
Roll.
roll in again.
Yep.
I wondered about that.
Yeah.
So the prep is already being done.
Yeah.
I would say that another benefit of
month.
the increased levies
It's
on
a
the tax
month.
rate would be, you're gonna get more TIF money next year too. There are benefits. That's all I really have for this evening. Now, I don't know if Chris, Jen, you guys wanna?
I do have, Sue will also be presenting.
Chris, before we get to Sue, I want to pause real quick and kind of go out of order a little bit. If the public has any questions or comments about this portion of the budget, before we go into utilities, just come on up and ask away. And if you introduce yourself once, your name and address, we'll just
Yeah,
carry
let's
that
come
over.
back.
Mary Jo Dixon, 8711 West 132nd Place. What is the timeline for the resolution for the levies? Like, you said you have to go through
Yes.
hearings and stuff. What does that look like?
So the notice has been published online already about a week ago or so. I can't remember, Jen. Yeah.
We posted Friday.
Oh, Friday.
The public hearing will be on October 4th.
So, yeah, public hearing will be on October 4th. The actual budget resolution will be signed at the next meeting after that, which would be the 18th. But the actual levy will be determined when we receive the 1782 notice,
Right.
sometime in December,
There's something.
usually. Sometimes January, sometimes February.
And then you mentioned that 5%, if the salaries went up 5%, that it can be taken away from the levy. I was a little confused on that.
So, some of the council members wanted to know what would be the impact of having kind of a baseline of 5% salary and wage increase versus 3% increase. And so what that would do is, because we've already advertised,
Right.
we have that notice out there of our appropriation budget or figure for the general fund, we can't go above and beyond that.
Okay,
And what we advertise is based on 3%.
okay.
So if we want to do the 5%, we can go ahead and rearrange from services and charges to personal services,
Okay,
but we can't just add to the budget now.
okay, that's,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Thank you very much.
Is there any comment online on that portion, Jen?
No.
Okay. Anybody else? Anyone from the staff?
If COLA's at about 6% right now, why would we not try to get a 5% at least raise for the staff?
Well, you can see that that's what we're efforting to do.
No, I guess my question is, knowing that, why wouldn't we put in for that instead of 3% right after that? Is that?
Well,
There'll be additional, I think we need to do additional funding for it, don't we?
there were so many updates to the budget that I didn't want to comfortably say that we can do the 5%, and then come back and later say, sorry, no, you can't. I'd rather have it be the other way. So that's really what happened there.
I can tell you the goal, though, Bill, is to get to that 5%.
Yeah.
Okay, that's the goal.
The committee was working on a 5% goal.
That's where we want to be. We're gonna work hard to get there, to make sure that we can get there or close to it, because, I mean, as was talked about, the private sector is going gangbusters with pay, and the public sector is just slowly lagging behind it. Every government unit is feeling that same pressure,
Right.
losing talent to the private sector. So, no, we're aware of that, and that is the goal.
Yeah, and just to touch on that again, is the good thing about appropriations are we can always increase them. Now, the levy, whatever is in our notice for max levy, that's max. We can't, no matter what, we can never go over it. I just said we can't increase the budget, but we can do an additional appropriation to increase the budget, but, yeah.
Any other questions?
Was the body camera, car cameras included in that entire budget for CCD?
It is.
The payment.
Yeah, the payments are.
I think what we were estimating, 63.
Something
I
like
think it was
that.
like
Yeah, I think that's what it was.
No,
Something.
80 was the first initial installment.
Okay.
Well, we got a grant for that, so it
Okay.
didn't come out of CCD for that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Any other questions, comments? Corby, thank you for the excellent presentation here.
Yeah, thank you.
I really like how you kind of walk everybody through money in and money out. I mean, it's so important for the public to understand it too, and the way it's presented is very understandable. And, again, the goals are is to make sure that we maintain as many of the boots on the ground as we can to provide the service. That's always the number one goal, is keeping people in place that do the work. So, thanks for your work on this, and hopefully we have, everything comes out exactly as we have it.
You got a good team, so.
Yeah, we sure do.
He's a rock star, he'll get it done.
What's that, Chief?
He's a rock star, it'll get done.
I like how you think.
Yep.
Next, Chris, if you want to introduce the next part here.
Yeah, so we've had Sue creating this was another working project between the group that you had mentioned, whipped together a sewer, water, and stormwater budget for it, so. Yeah, if you want, if you're comfortable going up there. So it's also uploaded on your iPads as well. It's
And the first time Sue and I talked about this, I
Right.
think, was at an AIM conference in about 2017, when we started kind of formulating a strategy on this. So it's another overnight success story of budgeting and financial management.
Overnight, yes,
Yeah,
overnight.
it only took 5 years to get here.
I've grown old.
I didn't say that. Those were
I
your
admit it,
words.
I admit.
Those were your words.
We're going to start with sewer first, and what I had prepared is we had not done an operational analysis, but by virtue of us wanting to do a budget, what I said is, I've given you in your packet the cash receipts and disbursement statements that give you from 2016 through 2021, okay? And that's historical, of how we've changed and revenues have changed. And there's 2 pages. The first page is your operating. Your second page takes it then into your debt, your capital, your miscellaneous revenues. I've also given you, we get some distortions because of system development charges and everything like that, because we have to keep those below the line. Because typically, Corby, correct me if I'm wrong, but we do not pledge them to any kind of debt. We can't for a state revolving fund. But we typically don't do it for anything else because it doesn't really help us in our ratings any.
That's right.
Because it is a growth revenue, so you're not guaranteed it's going to be there year over year. So it doesn't really help us that way. It's just, but we want you to see what it is. Your capital budgets on all 3 utilities will come probably within the next 3 weeks, 4 weeks, because we're trying to, it's more of a cash flow on that to show what we're going to generate potentially from the 2023 budget, add that to what our fund balances already are, and then here's our wish list, here's our ranking of it, and so we can go forward. Typically, you guys have always seen a revenue requirement page, and that's what I've got on your Exhibit B. And what you can see, there are 3 columns. One is the current at 12/31/2021, pro forma annualized 2022 under your current rate. All of these are current rates, by the way, which is our, for residential and sewer, it's $48 per month. And when I say annualized, that means as of August 31st, I looked at what we had incurred, and I annualized it. It showed that it should be, like our liability insurance, we've paid that in full, so therefore I would not annualize it for an additional 4 months because we don't owe it. But I did your payroll. There were several items that all of those got annualized. So if you look at it on the first column of the 12/31/2021, our gross revenue requirements are $4.41 million. Non-rate revenues are ones that you don't that are just miscellaneous revenues, tap fees, items like that, that the cost is embedded in our operational costs and everything above, but yet they don't change. They're not subject to a potential increase if that's what you want. And then we also take off what our pro forma revenues are, which is the 4.273. That is operating revenues. That is not your system development charge, because system development charge is the growth paying for the growth. So we don't have that in there. As you can see, just as 2021 stands alone, we had an excess of $102,836 over those revenue requirements. And you have to understand, sewage treatment costs with Lowell are $758,000. Purchase power was $88,000, almost $89,000, and our other operating costs was $1.859 million. And then we also have our debt there. We also have the Lowell debt, because you have a two-component charge from Lowell. You have your, well, you really have more than that, but your main components are your Lowell debt. That is their long-term debt on the plant. And then you have their operating costs for the treatment of the waste. We also have a true-up, and that it's typically been caused by capital expense, which therefore we pay from our growth funds.
Is that the item 8 with nothing next to it?
You know something? Wow.
Called true up?
Yeah.
Sue,
Go ahead.
Is there a way for us to get our hands on that debt service schedule with the Lowell plant? You know, $500,000 a year that's a heavy number. And I'd like to see when that matures.
Yes, I have that in my files.
And that way, as part of our strategic planning for our own community,
Yeah.
is, you know, looking towards the future, is what kind of value do you get out of the investment? You know, is there an opportunity here to do something internal as far as investing in sewage treatment that would be a little more long-term value for the community than the current situation?
Mm-hmm.
Because we're going to continue throwing money at that plant, because Lowell and Cedar Lake are both growing like crazy, and it's going to get to a choke point at some point, where you just don't have any more space to grow it, and it becomes inefficient to keep adding little pieces to it. So I just want to get the council and the utility board here kind of geared in that direction, to look out here at the maturity of that debt, so we can start to plan the next step.
And remember, that's 50% of the outstanding debt, because that's what we're on the hook
So
for.
if there's $1 million a year in debt service on projects there, what does that $1 million a year equal in value, and how does that affect the long term?
And I may be dating myself on this, but I think the concern was years ago that we had when we grew, that debt grew, was the fact that we didn't gain really any additional capacity. It was just the way that the treatment came. And so...
There was more improvements in the type of treatment because of the changing regulations of how it is treated. It was more of a modernization of the plant than it was an expansion. Now, we have invested in some expansion, but, overall, I think we've just got to get our minds thinking 10 years down the road here, is how do we take that money and start leveraging it towards something more long-term benefit.
And I apologize for line 8. I don't know what I did.
Oh, it's no big deal, but...
I like leaving it open. We just take a guess.
Yeah, we can make it whatever we want to.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun.
Well...
What was she thinking?
Yes, what was she thinking? No, there's a reason
True,
there, and it's tied.
it's the same number, Sue, all the way across,
Yeah.
167, 160, so it's some kind of amortization kind of thing.
Yeah.
Now you're speaking all this CPA lingo, Rick. I don't understand.
But if you look at it, and then the last line is the debt service coverage. And keep in mind that we have one outstanding debt, and that's it. And that is the 2017 refunded revenue bonds. They mature with the payment on April the 1st of 2025. Okay? And I will tell you, the reason you have two lines for your debt service there is I've shown you what the maximum annual debt service is on that current debt that matures on April 1st of 2025. Then I've gone and shown you potential on $8.5 million. How I did that was if you go look at your 2023 budget, and I think Corby and I briefly spoke on it, we used a higher interest rate than we probably will see, but we had to be conservative in doing this. We can always wrap the existing debt around it because our refunded revenue bonds, we do not have the opportunity to pay off early, to get rid of them so that we can get the full impact of the...
When's the maturity on those again?
4/1 of 2025.
So with our West Side Sewer Interceptor project, and we're phasing it, but by the time we reach the third phase, we're kind of estimating we're gonna be in that $15 million range plus. Is that gonna fit into this debt coverage of $8.5 million with that maturing bond rolling off? Are we gonna still be in that neighborhood of 2 on the coverage?
Oh,
So we're asking if the rates will be sufficient to
Correct.
basically take on a...
Yeah. Because, I mean, altogether...
cash flow,
Yeah.
that's,
I mean,
it's
our-
the cash flow that's the question.
Right,
Might overlap.
and also we're gonna have some back-end stuff on the lake ecosystem restoration that's gonna be wastewater related in expense, right? Because a lot of what happened to the lake's health was caused by the old septic field, so there's a tie-in there too. I just wanna get this stuff laid out there
Yeah.
as we're evaluating the long-term health of it and starting to plan out our projects. We need to think about those things, because we're gonna be adding a good bit of debt service to the sewer utility.
Yeah, I think, and I think I mentioned it, me and Sue are gonna get together and sometime before the end of October, make sure that we've got our sustainability plan all updated
Okay.
and utility capital stuff is right in, some of the stuff we still need to finalize.
It's very fluid, and we've been working on that, and the whole...
I'm excited.
Oh, it...
Who
It is another piece.
Yeah, there we go.
Like pulling your
Yeah,
teeth
we
out.
have some.
I actually kinda like this stuff. It's,
Once you get it,
the
it's
nuts and
fun.
bolts of it are pretty neat.
But that was a good question, because we could have a conflict there for a year or so.
I think that we just gotta look at cash flows, right? And, I mean, I see 1.88, proposed coverage on debt service of 8.5. Well, if by the end of the third phase, we're pushing 15 and plus another couple million for the lake, where we put some upward pressure on the rates.
Yeah.
Well, and keep in mind, that is a 2023 budget result. And I would tell you that given the cash balances that you have, that in sewer, it shows that you really would need an increase of $28,414. I would tell you that's in rounding somewhere. And so we can handle it with the way it is.
We can subsidize ourselves, so to speak.
Exactly, and
Gotcha.
Corby and I had mentioned it too, if we have to get rid of any problems created by keeping the one debt open and then wrapping the other around it, we can pay it off and then recoup it back because of it being one. But if I take this out further, and with very conservative growth estimates that we've all agreed on, you're going to grow your revenues there, and we will have more capacity for debt. But that is the picture in the 2023 budget, that if you wanted to know today,
No, I understand.
this is what we're saying. Understand, we have been conservative on our revenue estimates, and we've been very conservative on our expenses in the fact that we have kept a quite substantial increase in our expenses. Just so that I've used Corby's payroll numbers. We're still trying to get we're getting the final health insurance and stuff numbers like that. But we have assumed increases in items in expense that we may not experience them, but we don't know. So to be conservative, we're saying we're conservative on our revenues, we're conservative in stating more on our expenses so that we can stay within our budget, and then we can react when we have excess.
Thank you.
The next page over from that is, it just shows you how it changes from 2021 to the annualized 2022, and then from annualized 2022 to
I'll try to follow this.
2023 budget.
Thank you.
So, you have your debt component. Exhibit E shows you your calculation of your debt coverage analysis. And then Randy, Exhibit F is your,
I'm looking for exhibit letters here.
Up in the upper right-hand corner.
There it is, okay.
It's the very last one. That is your budget. And I know Ralph and Richard and I are excited about this because we're sitting here going, the reports we can run then once we have this budget in, and Jennifer too.
No, this is great. I mean, this is
Because keep in mind that
awesome stuff.
your 2023 budget will be what we put in January. So we are going to track revenues, and we are going to track expenses and monthly reports. And we can even probably do them, well, I'll have to talk with Rick about when we want those monthly reports, during the month, where the utility board meets, we may want them then, so that we can see, we're not quite done with this month, but here's where we stand. And plus, it will give all of your department heads the ability in your utilities to see where they stand. So they're not going to be coming to Chris. They're not going to be always coming to council. They're not always going to be coming to Jen and saying, hey, can I do this? They're going to know if they can do it, because they can see, well, guys, we're 5 months into the year and we've expended 75% of our budget. What did I do? They may ask us for detail of what it was they've done.
Our utility expenditures have always been very reactionary, and we want to create more of a responsive model, that's needs-based and growth-based. So this is an awesome tool. Thank you for this.
And this is, again, just what you're talking here at Exhibit F, just the sewage, correct?
And it's just the operating, because we really have to coordinate the sustainability plan and each utility. And then what we'll do is we look at cash on hand, what we're going to generate from the utility what it's intended to generate from the utility that year to go to capital. And then we will see, okay, here's where we stand. A great tool. And Chris and I have talked about it a lot.
Good.
On Exhibit F, if you go down to, after the transfer for debt on line 27, over in the far right-hand column, you'll see that the cash flow for capital improvements, simply from operating, not your system development fees at all, but from operating, is roughly $820,000.
Yeah, and so we use 200 homes a year as kind of our baseline. We've been over that, but we're probably going to be under that maybe for a couple of years, possibly, depending on where home prices kind of fall to. But even at 200 a year, $3,500 a home on an SDC, the math is pretty easy to do. What you end up with is $700,000 a year in SDCs that builds the cash that you can invest in certain parts of your capital needs internally to manage the system.
SDC sewer development charges.
Yeah.
Yes, sewer development charges.
But again, those
System
system development charges are not in here.
No, they're not, because it's a growth-oriented revenue.
It's a finite number, it's unpredictable, it's
Yeah.
miscellaneous.
Yep.
And the theory behind it is growth paying for growth.
Yeah.
The main reason is you can't use it to sell bonds.
Gotcha.
That's, yeah.
But you can use it to invest in your system.
Yes,
Mhm.
yes.
Mhm.
Kind of replaces the borrowing.
So I have a,
That's where we could reduce some of the debt load of some of the expansion.
so with all this financial shakeout that's happening in the market, bonds, treasury bonds, 5 year, 10 years, those will increase percentage-wise. Does that harm us then,
No, actually,
or does
if
it
anything, it
help
can
us?
help you, because one of the only things you guys are, as a town, are allowed to invest in.
Right.
So for you guys, well, yes, in the fact that there'll probably be less people to buy whatever bonds that you guys issue, but, you know, significantly to the point where it's a detriment, I don't.
So when towns and municipalities do these bonds,
Yeah.
who buys them? These big hedge
It's
funds?
usually been Boney, right?
Well, so Boney, they act as trustee for like SRF and a bunch of that, but, yeah,
I would
and
see
a
that
lot of
happening.
people, I
Yeah.
mean, banks will buy them, I mean, underwriters will repackage
safe
them.
investments.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, because it's guaranteed money.
Any
Yeah.
hedge funds?
Tax by tax.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's hedge fund, like the underwriters will take them, as I said, package them and sell them on the secondary market to probably hedge fund, I don't know.
I've seen
Yeah, I
a
would
lot of
be on
pension
both sides of
funds
this
buy them
world.
too.
It's kind of always interesting how this really works here.
Financial trading in itself is almost borderline illegal in its own way it does business.
Collateralized debt obligations,
It's really weird.
didn't do anything bad for the United States in 2008.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
The principles sometimes are confusing.
Are there any other questions on sewer?
You want the public questions on the sewer budget? Okay.
Water's next up then. Water, keep in mind, you are a regulated utility under the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission. So we have, we are limited in our revenues to earn only what, our rates were approved to do. We cannot, Corby, 15, 16 months to get in? Well, sometimes it comes sooner.
Yeah,
Right.
you get those speedy filings that
Yeah.
are, whatever.
We file everything but
6 months instead of
the
18.
kitchen sink.
I would be interested to know, altogether, we had a system development charge east side that we did first. Then we did an overall rate restructuring, and then we did another system development restructuring. How much were the personal service charges, those, and for attorney fees, for financial advisory fees?
A couple $100,000.
It was
It was
over,
probably over $500,000.
it was pushing $500,000 for the rate case.
Yeah,
For just the rate case.
I gotta
Just the
think
rate
we're
case.
probably over $750,000 at this point. And this is what people don't understand about the IURC. They don't help you keep it cheaper. It actually makes it more expensive.
Yep.
Right, being a part of that and not being able to have true home rule over your utilities doesn't protect the consumers. It protects the bureaucracy. Because the bureaucracy requires so much to be fed to it to do anything, where the statute already protects the ratepayer to make sure that any rate increase has to be justified by cost. That's in the statute. It's in the governing statute. So the IURC is basically another layer that all it does is create cost.
Well, it was
doesn't-
initially intended for non-municipalities,
Right, and they
like
folded all of us.
large
in.
water organizations,
Or like
to make sure
your
they didn't take advantage of
utility
taxpayers.
purveyors, your private utility purveyors like NIPSCO and
Right.
REMC. That's kind of the purpose of it, is to create some type of standard. But when you apply it to a municipal utility, it's an absolute killer to try and manage your utility.
Especially when we only have a couple thousand customers on our utility.
Even if you had
If that.
10,000.
It's a waste of money, we all know that.
Because as you get more customers and if
Engage
you're
in getting out of it.
applying it to more people, you're gonna pay more in those fees to basically do what the bureaucracy wants you to do.
No, you're right,
It's
is Lowell in it?
No.
No.
They're not in there, you
Not on-
Well,
Cherville is.
Well, now they are.
Indian American
Well,
Water.
Indiana.
Yeah, Indiana American is, yeah.
so now that Lowell sold their utility, Indian Americans are back in the IURC, which again, it doesn't help the ratepayers,
There might
not
only
a
be
single bit.
7, 8, 9 municipal water utilities left in the
Yes,
IURC.
they pretty well
In the
fall.
entire- Yep.
And this town
No
needs
wonder
to
they
get
love
out
us so
of it. Like, as soon as we possibly can, it needs to get out. Or else, every time we need to do anything, we're gonna be spending $500,000 to $1 million to do it.
And delaying ourselves a year.
And yeah, you miss opportunity
Okay,
for
Chris.
growth.
Write a to-do in your calendar.
I can,
I think he's got it there.
If I can say to
I'm on
you
board
guys
with that.
anything, do what you gotta do to get away from this mess of the IURC.
Corby, the IURC is,
Rough.
our IURC is still basically a historical test year too. I mean, they do allow forward-looking, we can make adjustments for 12 months subsequent to our test year. So our rate case was 2019 year end. We could make adjustments to capture increases in costs through 2020. We got the approval from the commission in January of 2021, and one of the stipulations was that we could not increase our rates until 60 days prior to when we issued the debt, which was March 24th of 2022. So we did finally get to increase rates that only took into consideration 1 year during a second year.
Yeah, so the impracticality of the whole thing is, like everything else that is state agency run, you look at the US 41 project, they did a traffic study about 7 years ago. So we're building US 41 based on 7-year-old data.
Yeah.
So now we're managing a water utility based on a 2019 study.
Well, it's like the lake.
And there's no factoring for inflation in there. Now we've seen the cost of equipment just go through the roof, and we're stuck with this. Right? And not that you want to jack up rates to people,
No.
but you want to be able to manage your utility based on real data instead of 5 years ago data.
Yeah.
Well-
It's crazy.
Think about your fuel costs. Case in point, we adjusted somewhat in 2020, but there is nothing on that NIPSCO rate, nothing. So, you have a one-pager on the water utility. You have the estimated 12 months ending 12/31/2022. I did the same item. I used as the 8 months as of the end of August 31st, 2022. I did annualization of those numbers. And we had a big, long discussion today on the revenues because we've had 2 rate changes. Because when we put the new rates in place in January, then we had to change them again to beginning consumption on July the 1st for the decrease of the utilities receipts tax and for the debt true-up, which was immaterial, but since we were doing the utilities receipts tax removal, then we just included the other. So it's hard to track it, but Jen and I really went through a lot on this and looked at minimum, maximum monthly revenues, and then came up, and the average is pretty much on track. So we feel very good about the 2013 budgeted water service revenues of $1.732 million. I did separate it.
2023?
2023, sorry. But the annualization was what we started with, and then we applied the growth on the for 2023. So we do feel fairly confident on the water service revenues. I did want to tell you that typically we haven't, our reporting system doesn't break out penalties that we get paid for. I went ahead and broke them out, and we're going to work with BS&A and Cliff to figure out how we have that as a separate revenue line item, because understand, as people pay more in a timely basis, that revenue is going to go down. So it will go away. It's not a material amount, but it's still a revenue item, and I don't want to normalize, I don't want to annualize it and then say, oh, well, we forgot about that. I have included, we just included your regular Reconnect fees as of the end of August, because we don't know how many people are going to be disconnected, and to normalize it and then use that same number for 2023, let's just use what we actually experienced as of that date. Miscellaneous revenues is the same theory. It's just miscellaneous refunds we've gotten back in that our system makes us book it as a miscellaneous revenue to offset potentially an expense that we made. So we're even with it. And the tax fees I reduced down to the 200. Chris and I talked about that, and we decided 200. We want to stick with that growth number. And typically on SRF debt, we're not allowed to keep tax fees in operating income, but when you have $146,000 and it's supposed to be a cost-based fee, so you know the 146 is in your expenses. So therefore, to take it out, I have to also take out expenses. I left it in here because right now we're not going in front of the commission for a rate case, so I don't have to take it out, and I don't have to take it out for SRF at this point because we issued our debt with them with it below the line.
Got it.
So we're looking for a 2023 revenue budget for water of $1.906 million, $6 million. And then the same theory that I did on sanitary sewer, I did on water for their operating expenses, with the exception of the repairs on line 17. And the reason for that is we had several repairs that are the new source of supply they're oriented there. I didn't feel, and I talked with Chris and Jen on it, we feel we need a line item for those repairs that come up like that. And so I have left it in, I just did not increase it because it is just a budget number for us.
Right.
And I have detailed back every one of these up by our appropriation line items.
It's probably a safe number, though.
Well, that's what...
48,000 probably.
Well, keep in
Every
mind...
bit of that.
Yeah, and what the Ortman fees and stuff like that.
It adds
Well,
up fast.
yeah, we won't have that for the source of supply again,
Right.
the new one, but we might have it for something else. And I said, until we get a better feel of year over year, I don't feel comfortable taking that down, just taking those out.
Yeah, that's smart to leave it in because we're doing things as we speak to water.
Well, remember,
And we just bought the well from the lighthouse, and as soon as we bought it, we dumped $100,000 in or $80,000. So you gotta have that much money in that line item, just in case.
remember also with HEA 1245, I think it was, from last legislative session, now when a developer builds a water utility,
You gotta pay them.
we gotta pay them not just for their cost, but 1 year revenue times 3.
That's crazy.
So the legislature now is basically forcing us to kind of use our SDCs to buy back our own utilities.
Can we not get a contract that says we don't owe them that?
Well,
Have we talked about that?
we can.
That was a big discussion.
Okay.
We
We did a water recapture agreement, and then the law changed, and then we have to turn around.
We could do a PUD in lieu of zoning, a contract, but if you're doing a PUD on everything, what the heck do you have a subdivision control ordinance for then? That kind of makes that thing void. It doesn't even matter at that point if you have a...
And if you go outside of the actual land, which is a PUD, then you fall in the new law.
Jurisdictional, yeah.
Well, and I think we had a more lengthy discussion on that, and the whole thing is that I suppose if a developer was adamant about not being paid for it, It's a possibility, but you're always at risk for some regulatory body to come back on you, because they are, whether you're in the jurisdiction or not of the commission, they are under the commission's jurisdiction, those kinds of agreements.
Right, and that's the little thing with some of this legislation that's happened, is that even if you're, and the next target is sewers. That's coming this next session, and the Home Builders Association is pushing it. Right, so we're charging these SDCs to invest in the expansion of our utilities to be able to handle the growth, and then the legislature is turning around and bumping up the profit margin of some developers on the backs of the municipality, where we can't necessarily recapture that. So now we're gonna spend all of our growth money on just buying back our own utilities. Pretty interesting. But go on, Sue. I'm sorry.
Well,
You're off course with this stuff.
what Corby and I haven't had a chance to discuss, I did voice my concerns with Chris and with Jennifer that our payroll costs are substantially above what was approved in the commission's order to us. So obviously, right now, if you look at this and you go down to the line 40, the coverage for our debt, because we do have numerous outstanding debts. For water, we do have a 1.28 coverage. It's not robust, but the only debt item that we have that is not through the SRF is the 2010B, which was...
That was the initial bond issuance for the
2010B was for the water main extension on the north side, and I can't remember the name.
That was right after the utilities were condemned.
Yes, that's right after we bought, that's right after the 2009.
Yeah.
So that one is due to roll off within the next 2 to 3 years, I believe. So, but we have a 1.28 coverage. We fulfill our bond covenants, so we're okay. We do generate, but we only generate $97,000 of additional revenues then for capital improvements in water.
That's pretty slim.
That is pretty slim, considering if you look at lines 41 through 45, you can tell that what we actually spent in 2022 to date, with no increases for annualization, we're going to be using cash of $199,000. So
There's our cash balance?
Well, there is no cash balance.
She said we have a shortfall.
We'll have a
That's why
shortfall.
now.
On the
I
water.
saw that, but I do think that, don't we have some...
Well, we have cash balance, yes, but don't forget, we do have some of that spoken for already, because we are doing the Utopia construction observation through our cash on hand.
Got it.
So, but that's the only thing. Jen and I will keep our eye on revenues, because I think when we get to the November bill and then the December bills, we'll have a better idea of the impact of this, of the rate increase and the slight rate decrease, and so therefore we can see more whether or not we have more revenue or not. I think we will probably have.
It would go down though, since people aren't watering their grass.
It would, and see, we looked at it though, and we saw the increase in the revenues for the impact of the when we could first start charging the new rates. It was with consumption beginning 1/24/2022, so the bill that went out would have been, I believe it would have been the March billing. Okay, so what we did is we saw, but it wasn't a full month, but we did see an increase there. But in August, what concerned me is I saw $235,000 when our average for the 8 months was only $138,000. So and then Jen and I were talking on that, and we've changed a little bit of what we're doing in the fact that it's no longer necessarily an individual meter per irrigation hookup. It's one meter that breaks into two different lines past the meter, one for irrigation, one for the home. And by doing that, we cannot track what the impact is of our irrigation. Some of them, we still can. And it was pretty substantial before.
I bet it would be, yeah.
Yeah.
'Cause we've had a drought year.
So
That's
what Jen and I we felt comfortable using this revenue number, but we want to monitor it, and we will adjust it and let you guys know when we find, if we feel that there's a higher number that we can use.
Okay.
But keep in mind, this is the one that we don't have a lot of wiggle room in, because our rates are our rates, and we'll just, capital improvements, we're going to eat our cash balance up in 2023 for what we've already committed to, and that's the capital budgets will come at the end, probably in November. And keep in mind, the thing that I know, it's weird, I get excited about it, is that we will be able to track where we're at on a report that comes to the utility board and to the council, as far as month over month over month, because you'll be able to see, wait a minute, why is our revenues lagging? Or, hey, we said we had $641,000 worth of payroll, and we're, 5 months into the year, and we've already blown through over 50% of it. What's the matter? What are we doing wrong? Hopefully it gives us a better reaction time to it. And then sewer is, wait a minute, water. Any questions, guys, council?
No, it was education.
Yeah, thanks, Sue.
I love this stuff. It's like Christmas here for me.
Randy can't wait to get to county.
I like these budget, these are just to me, it's so interesting
It is interesting.
of how all this fits and works and.
Well, and it's a roadmap. It's a roadmap for everybody in the town organization that, I don't have the money to spend that. You want me to do this? Okay, so let's work on where we're going to get the money to do it.
It's like all those people out there that say, why don't you, right? This is why don't you. Right? This kind of tells the story, because unlike the federal government that can say, we're going to pass $1 trillion infrastructure bill with absolutely no tax backing or no fee structure to go with it, we can't do that.
Or direction.
Right?
No, and that's why we really felt it was important that we don't just budget expenses. We budget our revenue so we can track our progress on it.
That's huge.
It's going to be a great managerial tool.
Yes, because then Chris and Jennifer have the ability to say, brakes on, May, June, brakes on everybody, because, let's watch our P's and Q's right now because something's not going on right. So we can see where we're at. Okay? Any other questions?
Nope.
Okay, stormwaters, last but not least. And I think everybody does realize that we do have constrictions in our stormwater. So we are, we've got a group together, a working group together that is going to look at, how best to attack the issue. Because we have got road projects coming down the road that have major stormwater components. Keep in mind that our roads and streets get destroyed by not taking care of our stormwater.
Yep.
And we sure as heck don't want to spend what we're spending on the lake and have it go back.
Yep.
So we have to move forward on a lot of major projects. Corby probably felt like I beat him up pretty bad on it, because I told him, I gotta have relief on payroll. I gotta have relief, so, sharpen the pencil. And he did. You can see that we got almost $123,000 relief on that payroll, so that we could bring more to the bottom line. Revenues on your stormwater, keep in mind that it's based on equivalent runoff units, equivalent residential units, okay? And just because we have 200 new homes, okay, occupancy, we do not have 200 new customers. Because if that property was already within the boundaries of the town, we were already getting something on it.
Right.
We were already collecting revenue. Now, at minimum 50%, because if it's a platted lot that is standing vacant or is currently being built on,
It's $5 per year.
$5 per ERU.
Unless they were, and we're almost done being able to annex new property, unless they were still in the county.
Exactly.
So Beacon Point West, we annexed the Maple Croft Farm.
Mm-hmm.
Thus, that is new.
That is brand
But we
new.
are almost, if you look now at our GIS map, we have only 2 more blank areas that are not annexed within our box. So we're about out of that as well. Any other new annexation will have to come on the outside perimeter borders of the community. So what you said is spot on, because it's went from agricultural,
Yes.
but we were already collecting some money.
Something on it, yeah. So it's not prior to that being platted, now we have 10 new dollars. No, we have a net. And so basically what I did to estimate our revenues for the rest of 2020, well, on this one I only used 2023 revenues, and this was the first stab at the budget. So you didn't get a necessarily comparison on the revenues. What I did is I said, we know that we've got at least what we had that we billed for in August of 2022. So that is what I used, okay? Now, I did break out your penalty revenues again, because penalties is $17,234 at the end of, well, in August of 2022. I wanted you to realize that if people start paying their bills, because that penalty is another charge on top of what they actually will pay. So, I just want you to know that, we could lose 20 grand roughly in the picture, but I don't think so. We also are working on our Ms4 Inspection Fee, Don Oliphant, Chris, David Austin, because what I've found is when I compare the revenues in the year to the expenses specifically noted from Burke for those costs, we're not covering those costs. And the current customers should not have to pay for development.
Absolutely.
So that should be one of those cost-based wash ones.
Yeah.
And there might be a little bit of a lag, a cost comes in before, well, a revenue comes in and then a cost comes in the next year, maybe in a January or something. But it's not material, but we want that, and that number does flip all the time. I've seen it as high as in the 20,000s, and then this is about the lowest I've seen it at the $8,005. But we used what we have, so that is something that will change. You will see a variance in the reports that we get when we compare to budget. There is one addition on your expenses, because in previous attempts at doing a capital budget in previous years, we have said we need something in annual ditch maintenance/improvements. To me, I view that as an ongoing, longer term maybe, it's to avoid capital replacement. So we felt that it was an item that should be in your operating expenses. We put $40,000 in because we have blown through the previous amount that I had always been given of $20,000 every year. So I said, we're not going to do this frustration again. We're going to put in a reasonable amount. That is a line item, so Tim will know, I have this to work on those ditches. I do have some asterisks that will take you down to items at the bottom there. The revenues on line 2 do not include a partial removal of the non-residential credit. I know we talked about that back in 2017. We gave the 20% to non-residential users. I have been talking at length with Don Oliphant, and I started out with trying to understand what's the difference between one ERU that's a non-residential and one ERU that is a residential. Well, there's not. So right now, I don't know that it makes any sense that at least there we give a credit.
The premise behind it was, since most commercial users are multiple ERUs, like 4, 5, 6, 10.
It's quite a bit compared to residential.
Right, so it was a way to soften the blow of what was a 100% increase in the
Yeah.
rate.
Yeah.
And again, once you're done with this, we'll talk about a little bit what you and I talked about as a way to create a better business model for this utility.
Yeah, because we adjusted that.
Yes.
The whole community was in
Well,
outrage.
we went, what,
We
12 years from, or 14 years from the time of its creation to the first adjustment?
Right.
You know, we've got to be a little more looking forward in this particular revenue stream, especially with the opportunities and the needs that are going to be out there for us to capitalize on. So once you're done presenting the budget, we'll kind of walk through what you and I talked about.
So I wanted to let you know that revenue number for 2023, I believe Chris and I said probably in November, we will, the utility board meeting will bring something where we do a recommendation. Because I want you to understand that the most impacted non-residentials have gone through our credit mechanism now. And they have a permanent reduction in their ERUs because of our credit mechanism, that if they put in infrastructure that mitigates their stormwater flow, they got a credit.
Yep.
The majority of those have, from all I know, have come in, because we have changed, if you go back to 2017 and look at ERUs, and you look at ERUs now, there's a great big difference.
And they're actually mitigating the runoff impact, which is the whole point of having an MS4 function of your community.
Yes.
To manage that.
But what we wanted to, what we're left with, and I'm working on a sensitivity analysis on that, I know, geek, but to see, what we have left in that non-residential and the different, how many in each, 1, 1.5, 2, so that we can see where the impacts would be if we remove that non-residential credit. But that's forthcoming. We also, on the engineering and on the professional services, I got with Jen, because we knew we were in constrictions in 2022, and Chris, I believe you were aware of it too. And we did take away allocations, sharing of allocations in the professional services, of engineering, and probably attorney, consulting, and stuff like that, so that if they were specific to the stormwater, they were specific to the stormwater, we paid them from stormwater, but we're not sharing with things that benefit the town as a whole, because of our constrictions right now. That doesn't mean it's written in stone, it will go forward, but right now, so that we can have some money for capital improvements, that's what we've done. And then the third item is we have capital commitments in 2022, and in looking at the 2022 budget, afraid's not really the right word, we can anticipate potentially a shortfall to meet those capital needs. And I thought that I should note this to you, because there's about $53,000 that we may have to carry forward to 2023 to pay. Because some of them haven't come on, and we haven't paid as much. We're not as far along in some of the projects as we thought we'd be, so therefore it may just get pushed anyway. But if I'm looking at revenues and I'm looking at expenses now, that is a potential that I wanted you all to be aware of. Because on line 36, after we've paid debt, after we've paid the pilot, the payment in lieu of property taxes to the general fund, it shows that we have roughly $260,000 available for capital projects. Keep in mind that if that $52,575 shortfall comes to fruition, we have $200,000.
So why can't we push it from this year to next? And make that 259 plus the extra amount that we haven't paid out in the projects that got pushed? State doesn't allow you to do that?
I'm not sure
This is not a regulated budget.
No, this is not. Yeah, we
It's a
can.
home rule budget.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that if in 2023, over time, we have $259,000, keep in mind that we may have to use $52,000 of that for projects that we didn't get revenues enough to pay
Right, this year.
in 2022.
Right.
We're lucky if they get pushed, but keep in mind, we have, last time, well, we might have a little bit more now, but last time I checked, we only had roughly $32,000 in capital. We may have a little bit more. We have some we may be able to transfer from, as of 8/31 of 2022, it looked like in operating, once we met our covenants of keeping 2 months of O&M as a reserve, not only do we have to do a debt service reserve account separately, or in this case, ours is a surety policy, an insurance policy, but we also have to keep 2 times our O&M in there so that we have operating cash. That is, it appears like we may have some excess there, but rather than do it every month and have to take money from capital and transfer it back to operating because we're shy, and then keep on transferring back month over month over month, Jen likes to, we've talked about it, it probably makes sense to do it twice a year. And so hopefully we've got that covered. And that is the reports that I've been working on to give you examples of. I'm monitoring it to see how we're keeping our cash funds, and then I can let Jen know what it looks like. So, but you know, if that excess over the minimum required O&M balance holds true, then we will have that shortfall that's anticipated for the 2022 project to carry forward. And it'll be covered. And then we do have the full 259 then over the year, but that only comes over the year, so.
Okay. Thank you.
Any questions for Sue on this?
And keep in mind, I have been told.
You all don't look as excited about this as I am.
That's good stuff, Randy.
Well, the whole thing is on this, is I have been told by Don Oliphant, Sue, I can give you millions of dollars worth of stormwater projects that need to be done. It's not going to do me any good to give you a budget. You tell me what I've got to work with.
Right. And that's a true statement. I mean,
Yeah.
almost every road in this town was here before we were a town. So we have no stormwater anything.
And if I can kind of summarize the conversation that Sue and I had, Chris and I had about this, right, is if we kind of hit the rewind button back to when we did the first phase of 133rd, that was a TIF project, it was an 80-20 federal project, but part of the 20% match for us was TIF revenue and stormwater, because we did a lot of catch basin, stormwater, storm drains within the corridor. That kind of started a lot of our stormwater investment in the community, but it was always an essential piece of any type of capital project for us, and it's no different today. Now that you have that massive increase in gas tax in Indiana 2 years ago that has generated the community crossings grants
And there's a good chance that those are going to increase maybe to the tune of 1.8 million at a max, which means that we would have to match 1.8. Plus, we're gonna end up with other, personal services costs above that for, different engineering that falls outside the scope, legal fees, things like that. Coming up with a plan for this utility is essential to our ability to be able to do any of our capital projects.
Fact.
This thing is a cornerstone, and I don't know if people realize it. So in talking with Sue, we're trying to look at this like we have everything else with Corby, is let's figure out how to sustain a business model, right? Come up with a financial plan that's workable, not just for the town, but also for our customers. Because you always have to be sensitive to the people that are paying the bill. This, again, like I tell people, there's no such thing as government money. It's all people's money. So this is always important to make sure that we're charging fees that are affordable for people and investing them in a way that increases the value of the community and their own neighborhoods. So in looking at this, trying to come up with a 5-year plan, we need to first take our asset management plan, which is that document that BS helped us create, I think was back in 2017 or 16 was the first time we did one. And it rates all the streets of the town based on the PASER rating system, right?
Yeah.
And it gave an estimated cost, kind of general. We need to update those costs to modern numbers because of the CPI adjustment, so much the inflation of these projects. That's the first step, and then we need to attach a revenue source to each one of those projects so we can figure out an estimated time frame of when we can actually get them done.
Yeah.
So now instead of the asset management plan just being a document with data, it's actually a working document that gives you a roadmap on actually how to execute the plan. And then you need to incorporate within that plan the equipment capital needs. So you have two types of assets that you're going to invest this type of money in. It's your capital assets, which is your stormwater component of your streets and your neighborhoods, and then it's your equipment needs from a capital standpoint. So if you need to buy a vac truck for the...
Yeah, trucks and backhoes and ditch.
All that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So in talking with Sue, you've got a couple different ways to do this. You need an increase in the cash flow in order to make debt service on large projects. So if you've got a $1.8 million match on a grant, you're going to need a substantial portion of cash flow from stormwater for that component of it as part of your match. The other part of the match, again, comes down to keeping ourselves conservative enough to where if we've got to do any kind of lease rental revenue bonds or special benefits tax, we have the room within the levy to do it. And then the second part of it, if we're looking at buying the capital equipment, you start looking at system development charges within the storm sewer utility. So let's just say for a baseline number is $1,000 a unit, just for a baseline, and that might be too much. But if you build 200 a year, at 200 grand, and if you start building cash balances there, when you need equipment, you buy it with cash.
Right.
And you save the cash flow for the debt service. So you always have coverage that allows you to continue to move projects.
Well, we spoke the other day of road impact fees.
Well, that's...
So can you use road impact fee for storm or not?
No, road impact fees are basically like a park impact fee where it has to be for the new, and Chris can probably speak more to this, but most of what you see road impact fees invested in are intersection improvements that the choke points of traffic in growing communities are intersections. And so that ties to the new construction, so you can use road impact fees for that. You can't use it on existing inventory. But if we're going to get the most out of what our taxpayers pay when they go to the pump and fill up their tank, which comes back to us in the forms of the community crossings, we have to have revenue streams identified that help us to maximize that capability. Because if the state awards us $1.8 million, we want to be able to do a $3.6 million project. That rebuilds an entire section of neighborhoods, stormwater, streets, the whole 9 yards. That is a value-added thing for the citizens of this community. So,
without a doubt, but coming up with a formula as to why we have to raise the ERUs and increase that monthly fee, because it's already kind of
Well,
a pain for people, the sewer and the drainage fee. It's unlike any other community already. So I
Not really.
see where you're going with it, but it's very contentious.
a lot of the communities now have much higher stormwater rates than we do.
Is that right?
We used to be one of the highest, we're
Right.
now in the middle of the road.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying we need to raise fees to match other communities. We need to tie it to
To
that
make it
asset.
sustainable for us to
management.
grow.
Tie it to that
Fix
asset
that.
management plan, tie it to the, capital equipment plan, and then manage it from there and take smaller bites.
Yeah.
Rather than wait 10 years for a crisis, where what we see here right now is a budgeted shortfall in the utility. We've got to stop waiting for
Yeah,
that.
I agree with that.
We got to start being a little more ahead and actually tie our documents into a revenue source that help us to actually manage the assets.
Yeah,
It's
that's
called
a
an
good
asset
idea.
management plan, but really all it is an asset data plan at this point, because
Right.
we're not using it to manage anything. And so that was kind of the summary of what we talked about
Yeah.
and what we want to put together for a plan before the end of the year, is to come up with that 5-year window and see what that is going to require in additional cash flow, possible storm sewer system development charges, and start to actually execute this plan.
Yeah, no, that's a good thought.
And Cedar Lake has been, not lucky, but they have had the benefit of their growth. And their growth has helped mitigate increases. I have experienced in my previous life lots of communities that they wait 10, 12, 15 years to increase rates, and then yes, you do have rate shock. I also have some communities who say, how do we mitigate that? And the mitigation is, you can't, now keep in mind, you can't do it for your water as long as you're regulated.
Right.
But for sewer and stormwater, like Randy said, you take little bites every year. So think about it, we just talked about the COLA for our employees' wages. How do you think we pay that? So if we're giving them, if we want to give them 5%, how can we make the existing rate that we raised in 17 do something this year? So isn't it better, at least from where I stand in my own personal budgeting, if I'm going to get increases, I'd like to have them every year so that I can match it with my revenues there. I don't want to get a 20-25% increase because nobody wanted to put their adult panties on and suggest a rate increase, okay, over the years. Because we're keeping track of it. And there is budgets, and budgets are a big thing to do that because you're going to monitor where that's at. Why didn't we? The public can come and you'll have questions as council, as managers. Why didn't you get those projects done that you said you were going to do? You're going to have to tell them why you didn't do it because we gave you the money. You've got it. You gave us your roadmap. Why aren't we there? And it's a tool for you to find out, wait a minute. Okay, managers, why aren't we there?
Yeah.
And it's sooner, you'll find it out sooner rather than later.
Yeah, so that's just kind of the thought pattern of this, is going into next year. One of the things that I have kind of as a goal is to have this plan in place for you guys to adopt and utilize to actually take our asset management plan and actually build the assets. Instead of just looking at the plan, well, this one's rated 4, like, okay, how are we going to fund that? When is it going to be funded? You know, so much of what happens in government sometimes is like kicking the can down the road. And, you know, people often like to talk about, well, you got to build infrastructure ahead of the growth. You really can't. because growth is kind of a tool to maintain a steady baseline, but you can't always grow your way out of bad financial principles. Like at a certain point, with inflation, it affects projects. We saw it on Parish Avenue. What did we have, $250,000 worth of,
At least on
additional costs between the two sections
Oh,
of it?
yeah.
About $250,000 extra, and some of that was more mitigation, but some of it is just plain materials costs. It's labor costs, so all of this stuff incorporates into this, and it's never easy, like Sue said, to pass any kind of rate increase, but if we're doing things a little more steady, a little more proactive, we can soften that blow while we're getting projects done. And I think from a council standpoint, if you're gonna be good stewards of the public money, you have to show the results, right? Is that I'm paying you this, we've got a plan to invest it, and we're investing it.
Right.
And that's the difference it's making in your life. So the park budget's a great example of that. You're paying a little bit more tax, but you're getting a heck of a lot more quality out of your community and things that actually improve your life. So this is another example of that, and I'll be working on this with Chris and Sue and Corby and Jen, and we'll get something put together for the council to have going into next year, so this can be done and done right, done fairly, and we can get a lot more projects done over the next decade.
Yeah, no, don't disagree.
Now that Sue's done the hard part of getting it on paper for us, updating it annually would be a lot easier than keeping it current.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And keep in mind that it'll be living, so it's not just, we just did it at the end of 2022, and we're never going to touch it again in 2023. It's going to be a living document,
Do we,
so you may
do we
have
know
it.
the total number of ERUs?
Oh, yes, Sue does. But I have to go get my
I thought maybe you had that stored away in your,
No, with the help of Cliff,
in your.
I have really learned how to master the pivot tables, and I got more detail than you'll ever want.
Cliff is handy with that stuff, so.
But I was gonna say,
But that's a really good place, just in
Yes.
simple terms, for everybody to kind of get just a broad 10,000-foot view of it. How many ERUs do we have? We answer that question first, start to apply some of these mechanics to it.
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Yep. Thanks, Sue, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions, comments? Mary
You
Jo?
flipped on flipping. I forgot to ask this question earlier. The PSAP contract for 270, what is that? What does that mean?
That's for Southtown?
Okay.
Sure, Public Safety Answering Point.
Right,
Yep.
okay, I just didn't, okay, thank you.
If you remember, when that all first started, it was originally gonna be what they call a one-time levy transfer. And I'm trying to remember if it was .042 was the rate on that or something. So actually, if you applied $275,000 to our overall rate, we're coming in lower than that by a pretty good amount. So I think we got a better deal for our community and a good PSAP too. Any other questions? Comments? Council? Jen?
No, I'm happy with the way we have continued to really look at the sustainability of everything. I guess I do have one request, maybe come November, December, if Chris and Sue will help me sit down with the department heads of the utilities to discuss the utility budgets and how they are to operate moving forward. I would appreciate the help.
That's awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks to everyone for the work on this. This budget represents a lot of progress in our community, a lot of progress. So let's keep the ball rolling. In the years to come, I'm excited, hopefully to have an opportunity to adopt this budget, and hopefully the state agrees with us that all of it's needed. So, is there any other public comment online?
Nobody's online.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for coming. Our next council meeting is October 4th. This meeting's